Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be diving back into the adventures of everybody's favorite undead superhero with Spawn number 23. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in August of 1994, can we just take a moment to appreciate how fantastic this cover is? This cover is so detailed and so dynamic and colorful. It just pops right off the shelf at you, and it couldn't be in more contrast with what we saw for the cover that was featured on issue number 22. Issue number 22 had a cover that felt like an afterthought or something that Todd just slapped together because he was really pressed for time, whereas, I feel like this cover really highlights just how dynamic a cover he can create if he has the time to put into it. And, this is, again, nearing the point where Greg Capullo takes over as the full-time artist for Spawn. And, I think issue 22 was kind of a really good example of why, in the fact that Todd was really getting pulled in a million different directions between, starting a new toy company and trying to also write and pencil a comic book and being one of the head honchos at Running Image. And he was starting to realize there's a reason why a lot of comic books are not written and drawn by the same person. And it's because, there's only so many hours in a day. But man, I can't say enough good things about this cover. I really love this one. Story and art, Todd McFarlane. Special thanks to Greg Capullo. Copy editor and letterers, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. We see here on the first page, this is kind of what I was talking about with Todd, not necessarily even having to take shortcuts, because he did have to write all this out and, create all of the narrative that exists on this page. But this page is really just kind of like a little bit of fluff filler to pad this issue. As we can see, it's literally just a rundown and backstory of each one of these characters up until this point. And most of this information is nothing new, save for one Twitch Williams, as we see that Twitch is, for the first time, given a little bit more backstory. And it's stated here that, he's a father who has 7 kids, which, if you ever watched the Spawn animated series, is one of the key differences between the comics and the series. In the animated series, Twitch was a bachelor with no children whatsoever, whereas in the comic books, he's a married man with a lot of kids. And I don't know why exactly they changed it between the two, but it is one of those big things that differentiates the animated series from the comic books. Now, for as much as I believe that first page was just some padding to try and extend the length of the issue, or at least fill out some of the pages, I can't complain about the second 2 pages, as we are treated to this amazing 2-page splash of exactly where we left off in the previous issue. We see Overt Kill closing in on Terry Fitzgerald. Terry, of course, in no position to defend himself. His gun is useless against Overt Kill's armor. And he is certain at this point that he's going to die, as he begs Overt Kill not to end his life. And, it's important to keep in mind that Overt Kill was reprogrammed by Tony Twist to believe that Terry Fitzgerald is in fact Spawn. This is because Tony Twist also believes this. Of course, they're both incorrect in this belief. But man, this is such a good image we see here of, Terry, believing that the end is near. Overt Kill believing that, he's going to just walk right over Terry and kill the man who basically destroyed him in earlier issues. I think it was 5 or 6 and 7. Yeah, 6 and 7. But, so much detail. We get full backgrounds, none of the just plain backgrounds with some lines drawn through them. This is a fantastic splash, and I really couldn't like it anymore. We then see Overt Kill beginning to taunt Terry, stating, "You wanted to be a hero, so why don't you act like it? Now stop cowering like a dog," taunting him as he leans over and smacks Terry up against a dumpster, which one would assume would kill Terry, but it doesn't. However, it does cause him some pretty severe injuries and pain, as of course Terry is just an ordinary human and has no way of withstanding any of Overkill's attacks for any length of time. We then see him fall to the ground as Overkill's silhouette moves through the shadows, closing in for the kill. This is one of the rare instances where we see one of the homeless women who lives in the alleyways as she runs for cover, stating that, oh my gosh, it's happening just like he said, I have to go find Al, meaning that she knows that Spawn is the only person who can help Terry in this instance. Unfortunately, Spawn is in another alley not far away, being confronted by none other than Sam and Twitch, who have been searching for Spawn for weeks after they saw him in the home of Billy Kincaid and are convinced that he's the one who killed Billy, which is correct, he did. However, the NYPD was under the impression that Sam and Twitch had something to do with it, and they were on desk duty for a long time. And now they finally met up with the guy they've been tracking to figure out exactly what happened. They want him to give himself up. However, Spawn states that that's not going to happen, as he's trying to find the weapons that he needs to defeat Overkill, but realizes that he doesn't have time. And he also tells Sam and Twitch that he has no intentions of surrendering, and if they want to help, he could use it, because the cyborg assassin that is about to kill his former best friend is not going to be taken down easily, and Spawn knows that without the weaponry he used before, it's going to be a real uphill battle. As Spawn continues to walk away from the two detectives, they're rather stunned that the man they're holding at gunpoint doesn't seem to be even slightly fearful of what might happen if he turns his back on them, as Sam even makes a point to say, "Hey, freeze, you moron, before we shoot." At this point, however, they're interrupted by the homeless woman we saw before, whose name is Emily, as she states, "Al, you have to come quick. You know, it's happening just like you said. There's a giant guy, he's as big as a house, all shiny and metallic, and the guy he's beating up isn't moving anymore, and she thinks he's dead." At this point, Spawn realizes that he's wasted too much time and is fearful that Terry's been killed by Overkill, and suddenly dashes into action, racing towards the aid of his friend. This sets the two detectives, Sam and Twitch, in motion, as, you know, Sam even says, "Twitch, you have to stop him." Twitch, we've learned now, is one of the most skilled marksmen on the NYPD, as he takes aim and lets loose one shot, which hits Spawn through the knee. Rather impossible shot, might I add. This whole concept of shooting people in the leg instead of, like, you know, aiming for center mass is kind of ridiculous, especially when you consider how hard it is to hit a moving target that's running away from you at speed through a spot the size of a human knee. However, to the surprise of both Sam and Twitch, after Twitch hits him straight through the knee, this doesn't even so much as make Spawn stumble, as he continues to run down the alleyway, and the two men can't believe what happened, as Sam even says, "Hey, I thought you," and Twitch interrupts and says, "I did." They then realize that something is very wrong with the situation, as they both start to give chase to Spawn so that they can figure out what's happening. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, we see that Wanda is at the home of Granny Blake and is just brought her daughter over there to have a nice visit with her grandmother, so that, you know, she can spend time with her young child and, you know, just check in and make sure her grandmother is doing okay, seeing as that she's elderly and blind now. But, you know, Granny Blake seems to be, you know, very excited that Wanda spent time with her, as Wanda even apologizes for, you know, how rambunctious her daughter was at the playground and how she's now tired herself out and is napping inside. Granny Blake says, you know, it's fine by her. It just means that they get to spend more time together. And it's at this point that Granny Blake mentions to Wanda that Al came to visit her, as we saw earlier, and she believes that he's an angel. Of course, she's blind. She couldn't see his actual appearance. And this is something that Wanda finds really shocking. However, their conversation is interrupted by the ringing of a telephone. Granny Blake asks if Wanda can go inside and take the call for her, which she obliges. And when she answers the phone, she's shocked when someone says, "Wanda, you have to get back home. There's been a shooting in your front yard. 2 men are dead, and the police say that Terry did it," as we see a look of shock on her face. And as we move to another part of the city, we are then in the office of one Jason Wynn. Jason is none too happy as he's being told of the fact that the two agents that he had tailing Terry are both dead now in his front yard. And they can't confirm that Terry had anything to do with it, but they do know that it was mafia agents who killed both of their FBI agents. This, of course, is not sitting well with Wynn as he's trying to find a way to pin all of the things that have been happening around his offices with the weapons being stolen and the files being stolen and his disappearance for a few days, all on the feet of Terry Fitzgerald. Even though he's come to realize that Terry actually had nothing to do with any of that, he's gone too far to turn back now and has to figure out a way to make Terry the bad guy so that he can save face. Realizing that his options are running thin, he tells his associate to get the neighbors that live around Terry and to do it immediately. In yet another part of New York City, we are teleported to the offices of one Tony Twist, who is furious with the two men that he sent to Terry Fitzgerald's home because, as he states to them, he already has all kinds of problems with the cartel breathing down his neck. The last thing he needs right now are two dead FBI agents and the problems of having the feds investigating them. He yells at the men stating, you need to go and make sure that Terry showed up for his rendezvous with Overkill and make sure that Overkill finishes the job and executes Terry. Tony then states, that he's tired of this. He has too many other things on his plate that he's dealing with right now. Of course, he's talking about the events that take place in the Violator miniseries. If you'd like to know more about the Violator miniseries, feel free to check it out in my Spawn miniseries playlist. The two men are unhappy about having to go back out and basically play cleanup behind Overkill, but they realize that if they don't, that it's probably going to spell the end for them, and they just agree to Tony's commands and head back out into the city to make sure that everything's going according to plan. As we see, Terry did in fact fall for the bait that the men laid, stating that they had his wife and daughter, and that if he wanted to save them, he needed to go to the alleyways. Terry, of course, had no idea he was going to be confronted by Overkill, and we see his head smack up against a brick wall and then him fall down, blood all over the wall, as Overkill continues to carry on with his assault. He walks forward, grabs Terry by the leg, and says, he's going to make an example out of him, and he's even going to see how far he can smash Terry's bones without splitting his body in half, as he lifts him up above his head to slam him back down into the pavement once again. Thankfully for Terry, it's at this point that Spawn finally enters the fray as we see him leap over top of Overkill, grabbing Terry in one of his arms and flying through the air, pulling him out of Overkill's grasp. And Overkill is shocked to see this, possibly because he believed that, Terry was Spawn, and is surprised that his information was completely wrong. Spawn lands about 20 feet away with Terry, putting him down on the ground, telling him to stay there, he'll handle this. However, Terry jumps to his feet and begins to run off, still panicked and believing that his wife and daughter are being held by the mafia, and thinking that he's the only one who can possibly save them. However, in doing so, he puts himself once again directly in the path of Overkill, who begins to power up an attack, stating that Terry's a dead man, as he unleashes a huge laser blast in Terry's direction, and Spawn realizes that his friend is once again about to die, and he has to do something to protect him. However, now that his costume has had more time to bond with him and create more of a symbiotic relationship, it moves on its own, as Spawn didn't have enough time to get in front of the laser beam. His cape moved out of sheer reaction to shield Terry from the laser blast. Spawn realizes that he can't let Overkill get off another attack, as he grabs a stray 2x4 from the alleyway, walks up and smashes it across the face of Overkill as it breaks in half. He knows that this attack won't be able to stop Overkill, but it will distract him from Terry, which is what Spawn needs to do in the immediate. However, this enrages Overkill as he begins to unleash his fury on Spawn, as we see Twitch and Sam finally catch up and find out that Spawn was in fact telling them the truth about what was happening, and they're pretty shocked at the scene before them. Overkill continues his onslaught as we see him smack Spawn underneath the chin and then punch him into a wall. These attacks, of course, hitting a lot harder than Twitch's revolver did. Twitch realizes that he's got to do something to help Spawn as he starts to unload his revolver into the back of Overkill. Of course, it has literally no effect. His revolver not even close to being powerful enough to penetrate the armor of Overkill, who ignores them completely as he continues to make his way over to Spawn's collapsed body and hopefully end Spawn once and for all, as he wants to get payback for what happened earlier. Meanwhile, back at the Fitzgerald residence, we see a cab pull up in front of the home as Wanda jumps out without even paying her fare, trying to get to her home to find out if her husband is okay. She, however, is cut off by dozens of reporters throwing cameras and microphones in her face, telling her that, her husband was involved in a shooting and that people were murdered and they want a statement. She makes her way through to a police officer who states that he can't let her into the home and that things aren't looking good right now. In fact, they even have an arrest warrant out for Terry. This, of course, throws Wanda into hysterics as she can't believe what's happening, as she screams out, no, it can't be. Terry couldn't have done this. She then runs across the street yelling to her neighbors, stating, "You have to tell them, please, you have to vouch for us." However, their neighbors all turn their backs as we see that this is how far Jason Wynn is willing to go, as he's threatened every one of them, as they all have something in their past. The first two neighbors were immigrants who had come to America through illegal means and don't want to get deported. The second of which had some unfiled tax returns from his past that he couldn't allow to ruin him now. The third of which had a child out of wedlock when she was a teenager and who is currently sitting in jail. And Wynn said that the only way he's not going to go to prison for the rest of his life is if she cooperates. And we then realize that, Wynn is pulling a lot of strings and is willing to go to nearly any length to make sure that he can pin all of the problems that he's facing on Terry. And this, of course, is ruining everything for his family. With two dead FBI agents in her front yard and a husband who is accused of murder, at this point, Wanda becomes overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. As she collapses onto her knees and puts her face into her hands, she sobs and begins to blame herself. She's already lost one husband, and now she thinks that it's possible she may lose another. And she believed that she could keep herself and her daughter safe from any of the hurt and trauma and sadness and fear of the situation and the work that her husband did by turning a blind eye to it all. However, she's immediately realizing that this isn't the case and that she could never hide from what it is that Terry does, as she believes that this might be the end of her family once again, and she doesn't know what her next move should be. Meanwhile, back in the alleyway, we see that Overkill has not let up in his assault against Spawn as he throws him down into the ground once again. However, Terry turns back and realizes that, Spawn just saved his life and he has to help him out and try to return the favor. Despite the fact that he has a concussion and several broken bones and internal bleeding, he manages to find the strength to get behind an empty dumpster and start pushing it forward like a battering ram, knocking into Overkill from behind. It's enough to throw Overkill off balance, who, I should point out, weighs like 1,200 pounds. As he falls, though, he grabs onto Spawn's ankle and throws Spawn back into Terry, righting himself in the process and stating that, the two of them are no match for him. We then see that Twitch is once again taking aim, and Sam doesn't understand this as he states, Twitch, there's nothing that you're going to be able to do with that thing that's going to hurt him. But Twitch states that he's got an idea. As Overkill continues his assault, we see that Twitch keeps his pistol at the ready, waiting for the exact moment he needs, watching Overkill continue to just pound on Spawn and Terry. Twitch just says, come on, show me what I need to see. As finally we see Overkill give him the profile of his head, and Twitch realizes this is his only chance. As he takes the shot, we see that the bullet enters into Overkill's ear. This, of course, is a part of his body that's not armored nearly as thickly as the rest. And despite the fact that the bullet's not enough to kill him, it is enough to interfere with his programming and cause a malfunction. As we see Overkill stop his assault, turn around, and begin to walk away, as he mumbles to himself, "Youngblood, bad rock, Youngblood, bad rock," as he plans on once again tangling with the members of Youngblood. This, of course, happens in issues that I haven't made it to as of the recording of this video. I'm only at issue number 3 at the point I'm recording this video, but I will get to further issues, and if you'd like to know more about Youngblood, feel free to check out my Youngblood playlist, specifically issue number 7 when we get to it, as that's what's going to deal with this storyline. However, as we see Overkill beginning to walk away, we see that Spawn is in really bad shape on the ground, covered in necroplasm that's leaking out of him, and not moving, as things are looking pretty grim for our hero at this point. On the final page of the story, we see Sam and Twitch standing over the lifeless bodies of both Terry and Spawn, Sam simply stating, "What a bloody mess," and Twitch saying quite literally, it's assumed that Spawn would most likely be able to heal from this, given enough time, as we've seen in the past him survive what should have been mortal wounds. However, Terry is in terrible shape, blood pouring out of many different parts of his body, and we're not certain at this point whether or not he has survived the attack. On the next page, we see image info once again, the same old of information about what's going on at Image Comics and upcoming issues. Nothing special to see there. On the next 2 pages, we see an advertisement for Todd Toys, which, as we all know in the future, becomes McFarlane Toys. This, of course, being the first run of figures that Todd McFarlane ever released. They were coming out right at the same time, which, again, kind of explains why Todd was dealing with having trouble making deadlines with the book and getting stuff out and putting the amount of effort that needed to be put into the comic book, when he was also trying to launch a brand new toy manufacturing company and try and also help in the day-to-day operations of Image Comics. It was, lofty goals that no human being could realistically meet, but he did his best and subsequently realized that his best wasn't good enough and that he needed to have Greg Capullo take over as the primary penciler for Spawn. We then get into the Spawning Ground, which is the letter column for Spawn, and there's a few letters that were pretty interesting in this month's issue, one of which was someone really giving Todd some crap about not explaining why issues 19 and 20 didn't come out, and then it went straight from 18 to 21, and they got released out of sequence. And, he was more not just upset about the fact that those books didn't come out when they were supposed to, but also that Todd wouldn't give an explanation. So in a long response, he actually does give an explanation in this issue. And basically what it boiled down to was that comic book sales dropped off pretty heavily from 92 to 93 as a whole throughout the industry. And the distributors were blaming late books for this. And while late books did contribute to that, there was a lot of things going on in the industry at that time, with oversaturation of the market and printing way more books than there were readers, and all sorts of extra covers and limited editions and polybags and stuff. And basically the comic book industry was overselling its customer base, and that kind of was coming to a head in 93. So because those 2 issues were going to be late, Todd decided to just not release them when they were supposed to come out, or he decided to not release the books in sequence and not put a delay on it, and instead just release 21 through 25 out of sequence and then release issues 19 and 20, so that, he could show the distributors, it's this isn't causing all of the problems and it. And it was more or less just to kind of prove a point within the industry But readers would have never understood that, and it was kind of weird that Todd didn't want to give an explanation, which I'm glad he finally did in this point, or in this issue, and it's something he should have done right away. There's also some other interesting ones where, a lot of the readers in these letter columns seem to not be understanding how slow a pace the story of Spawn is moving at. In fact, this issue only takes place like several weeks after issue number 7, when Spawn and Overkill had their first battle. So Todd was facing criticism for that, and I understand it. He's telling a story that's way more in depth than a lot of other comic books at this time. So, a lot of readers were coming from books where there was a lot of freak of the week type of stuff, and things were just kind of happening, little by little in every single issue, or I should say a lot in every single issue, and things were just moving along. Whereas, Spawn didn't have that pace. So, a lot of times people are, expecting explanations for things that they weren't being given, and are starting to get a little bit antsy about it. And Todd is, trying to explain to them like, hey, I know that the story's moving along slowly, but, you got to stick with it, and eventually your questions are going to get answered. And the last letter that I found pretty entertaining was one of the people writing in complaining about how ultra-violent the Violator miniseries was, which I found a little bit shocking, given that, Spawn's a relatively violent comic book in and of itself, especially for the early 90s. And if that person was a fan of Spawn and reading the Spawn main series, yes, the Violator miniseries is far more violent than Spawn, but it's not something that should have been completely unexpected. And, he basically just kind of blames Todd and says that, you guys were more concerned about the spectacle of violence than you were, just telling a good story, which I disagree with. I think that the Violator miniseries is a hilarious dark comedy, and that, yes, while it is incredibly violent, it's violent to a comical level where it's so over the top and so impossible in its scope and scale that it's just lending itself to the overall dark humor. But then again, those are just my opinions, and obviously this guy disagreed, but I did find it an interesting letter nonetheless. We then get a few pages of what I'm assuming are some reader-submitted pieces of artwork. One of Boof. I, at this point, have not done any videos on Boof. I only have a few issues of it, and quite frankly, I'm not exactly sure how many issues Boof ran for. It wasn't a ton, but eventually I'll get around to making some videos on the Boof series and the character as a whole. And on the next page, it's obviously a illustration of Spawn, but I really like this one by, who is this? John Betty. This is a really well done illustration. I really like the way that he utilized, I don't know exactly how he did this, possibly airbrush or maybe some early computer illustration tactics. But anyway, I really think that he did a great job illustrating the necro energy magic that Spawn uses. I think that looks super cool, and I really like this as a whole. I wish there had been a little bit more going on in the background, but, overall, I think this is a fantastic illustration. On the next two pages, we see some Violator fan art. This issue was coming out right about the same time, or maybe just a little bit after Violator number 3. And given that there were only 3 issues of the Violator, they couldn't print all of the Violator-related fan art in all of those issues. So I'm assuming that was why there are several issues of the Spawn mainline series in which they printed up the fan art of the Violator to try and, give more of the readers an opportunity to have their artwork featured, which I thought was a pretty cool idea. Obviously people are sending in, hundreds and hundreds of images of Spawn, but it was cool to see that they were willing to give up some real estate in the mainline Spawn story to feature some reader illustrations of the Violator as well. That's a nice little touch that I thought they put in. On the final page of this book, we see an advertisement for a Savage Dragon sculpture from Claiborne Moore. I completely forgot that this sculpture existed, and if I ever saw it and it wasn't completely outrageous in its price, I would absolutely buy it. I think this is a super cool statue. I have a few of the Savage Dragon mini busts that Claiborne Moore produced, and come to think of it, I don't know that any Savage Dragon statue has ever been produced by someone other than Claiborne Moore. If it has, I'm drawing a blank on it, and if I'm wrong, feel free to point it out in the comments section. I'd rather be corrected and find out that I'm wrong and then get the right information than just waltz through life spitting, falsehoods about, who was creating all of the Savage Dragon statues and mini busts. Not like anyone cares about that. But as I stated, I think this looks fantastic, and I really hope I have an opportunity to potentially buy one of these one day. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Boof number 3. As I stated a few pages ago, I do have a few issues of Boof, and I do intend on making some videos about them, but as of the time that I'm recording this video, I don't have any videos out about Boof. And that was Spawn number 23. Overall, I thought this issue was great. I thought it was definitely an improvement over issue number 22. So much more detail in the artwork. The story felt like it was far less rushed, and it really feels like Todd's making a conscious effort to try and intertwine a lot of all of the different narratives that we've seen happening throughout the series up until this point, all of the different subplots involving all of the different characters. And this is the moment where we're seeing it all kind of come to a head, and Spawn getting to a point where he's starting to realize that, it's not just about him and his actions. There are a lot of other moving pieces going on, and that he has to be careful about what he does if he wants to protect the people he cares about and the people he loved in his former life as Al Simmons. I think that, with the way that they finally got Sam and Twitch to confront Spawn, and, Terry being saved by Spawn, but then also taking the time to go back and save Spawn from overkill, and also Wanda being confronted with the stark reality of what it is that Terry does and the real danger that exists for her and her daughter. This is a really pivotal point in the narrative up until this moment where, a lot of the characters were just kind of existing, and now we see that things are about to change for a lot of them in a major way. But then again, these are just my opinions, and you might have completely different opinions. You may have thought that this issue was terrible, and that the story thus far isn't very good, and that this issue is not tying it together. But if so, that's just fine, because everybody's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.